At exactly 7:41 a.m. on a fog-drenched Tuesday morning in Cincinnati, I parked in front of the Harper & Sons industrial headquarters, a squat, beige concrete building that had once belonged to my grandfather, now renovated with chrome trim and floor-to-ceiling glass. I'd arrived early as always. The lot was nearly empty. I was still sipping my coffee when my phone lit up with a single red icon. One voicemail. One message. I didn't think anything of it. My mother left voicemails all the time, short, clipped requests. Elaine, can you review the vendor forecasts? Or Elaine, join me for lunch with the investors. Nothing dramatic. I placed the coffee in the cup holder, slid in my earbuds, and pressed play. But the voice on the other end wasn't brisk or commanding. It was flat, cold, calculated. Elaine, she began. Just my name. No sweetheart, no darling, no preamble. After discussions with the board and your sister, we've decided to restructure the executive leadership at Harper & Sons. Effective immediately, you're no longer part of the management team. Our legal counsel will be in touch regarding your shares. We appreciate your service and wish you well. That was it. No explanation. No warning. Not even a breath between sentences. Just silence, cut off like a power line had snapped mid-call. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, my coffee cooling in its cup. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. My pulse didn't even spike. It felt like the moment your ears ring after a sudden impact. Disoriented, suspended, and then stillness. At 8:03 a.m., I replied with a single word. Understood. I didn't walk into the building. I didn't badge in. I didn't tell anyone. Instead, I put the car in drive and headed east, toward the Ohio River, where an old law office stood in a converted brick townhouse, the same place I'd handled my grandfather's will 2 years earlier. The receptionist looked surprised to see me, but said nothing. She ushered me into the back office with its mahogany desk and a view of the water. Michael Trent, my lawyer, looked up from his desk with a raised eyebrow. You're early, he said. I sat down and placed both hands on the folder in my lap. Michael, I said, I need to sell my shares. All of them. He studied me for a long moment. Are you sure? He asked slowly. Once we start this, there's no walking it back. I know. Your mother and sister won't take this well. I met his gaze steady. They already took everything else. He gave a quiet nod and pulled out a legal pad. Let's begin. The first paper I signed that morning didn't feel like revenge. It felt like CPR, like breathing again after being held underwater too long. It wasn't rage. It wasn't pride. It was resolve. A clarity I hadn't felt in years. They thought I'd crawl back. They thought I'd cry on the phone, beg for a meeting, plead for a second chance. But I wasn't going to fight to be seen. I was going to make them regret ever trying to erase me. And I wouldn't raise my voice. I would raise their silence until it became unbearable. I started working for Harper & Sons the summer I turned 18. While my friends were filling out college applications, planning out-of-state adventures, or backpacking across Europe, I walked into the records room of our family's factory wearing second-hand slacks and a name badge that didn't say Harper. It said intern. My father believed in discipline. He told me if I wanted to be taken seriously, I'd have to earn it like anyone else. No favors, he said. No shortcuts. You'll start in the filing cabinets and work your way up. I didn't resent it. I believed him. I wanted to make him proud, so I stayed. I took night classes in accounting at a community college just outside town. Spent mornings running reports and afternoons learning GAAP compliance from a retired accountant who spoke more in numbers than in words. My salary, if you could call it that, was a weekly stipend that barely covered bus fare and textbooks. But I never complained. In my third year, I started managing payroll during a seasonal slowdown. The company was in a cash crunch, and employees were getting nervous. I remember staying up 3 nights in a row with spreadsheets taped to my bedroom wall, trying to make the numbers balance. When I discovered a $40, $3,000 discrepancy in the vendor invoices. I flagged it to my father, and together we restructured the supplier chain. The company recovered. Barely. The following spring, my father stepped down after a mild stroke. My mother, Janice, took over as CEO. She'd always been behind the scenes, polished, efficient, unreadable. But now she was the face of the company. My sister Samantha, 6 years older, glamorous, with a communications degree from California, was brought in as Director of Public Relations. It wasn't discussed. It just happened. I asked about the role one night at dinner, after we'd clinked glasses to Samantha's return home. My mother cut her steak carefully. Samantha's experience with branding will be crucial, she said. You're brilliant with numbers, Elaine. You'll run finance. I nodded. I always nodded, even when it hurt. When the northern facility lost a major client due to a production defect, I stayed behind in the office while Samantha was on a business cruise with a skincare influencer. I recalculated 5 years' worth of unit costs by hand, traced the pricing errors to a faulty autofill formula, and pitched a debt recovery plan to the board. We cleared nearly $320,000 in losses in under 3 months. Samantha later stood before the cameras and declared, "Our family made bold decisions to restore trust in the marketplace." She didn't mention me, not once. At 27, I proposed we expand into Kentucky with a new equipment leasing contract that would reduce operating costs by 17%. My mother and Samantha opted for a commercial bank loan instead. It was denied. I ended up putting up my own condo as collateral to secure funding from a private lender. The plant launched within 6 months. Once it turned a profit, they handed oversight of all expansion projects to a third-party consulting firm. Elaine did her job well, Samantha said in a meeting, but now it's time we scale professionally. No one objected, so I stepped back, into the shadows, again. When I voiced concerns about a pending deal with a logistics vendor lacking proper certifications, my mother sighed and said, "Elaine, must you always be so alarmist?" Samantha chuckled from the far end of the table. "You see risks in everything. It's your nature." 3 months later, the deal collapsed. The company ate nearly $75,000 in losses. No apology came. No one even remembered that I'd warned them. And that's when I realized I wasn't seen as a partner. I was a calculator with a heartbeat. There was never a single moment I could point to and say, "That's when they turned on me." No dramatic betrayal, no screaming match or slammed doors, just a gradual dulling, like the dimmer switch of my relevance was being turned down notch by notch until I was still in the room, but barely visible. It started with the emails I was no longer copied on. Contracts I used to review suddenly bypassed my desk. Samantha began hosting strategic planning sessions with department heads without informing me. I'd walk into the break room and find out decisions had already been made. Timelines adjusted, budgets approved, vendors changed. My mother's response was always the same. "Oh, I assumed you were too busy with accounting this quarter." Then came the seating chart shift. At our annual investor luncheon, I was placed at a table near the exit, next to junior staffers and interns. Samantha was up front, center stage, smiling next to regional directors and media sponsors. One investor leaned over and asked me if I was Samantha's assistant. I smiled. "No, I'm her sister," I wanted to say. "I've written the budget that's funding this entire event. I signed the contracts. I negotiated the venue discount. Without me, none of this would be possible." But I didn't say anything. I just smiled and passed the bread. They called me the ledger girl behind my back. I knew because one afternoon I walked into the hallway just as Samantha was finishing a joke. "Don't worry, the ledger girl will fix it. She always does." My mother laughed. Not cruelly, not loudly, but she laughed. That stung more than I expected. And yet I kept working. I stayed late reconciling vendor discrepancies. I rewrote compliance manuals. I trained new hires, handled year-end audits, renewed tax codes. It was easier to be the one behind the curtain than to step into a spotlight that had never been meant for me. But what hurt most wasn't being unrecognized. It was being deliberately erased. One rainy Thursday, I flagged a serious cash flow issue involving a contractor whose ISO credentials were expired. I brought it up in a budget meeting, complete with documentation. Samantha glanced at the file, then smiled sweetly and patted my hand across the table. "Elaine," she said, her tone saccharine, "you worry too much. Trust me, I've got it covered." 3 months later, the contractor defaulted on a bulk shipment. The damage? $74,800 in returned inventory. No one mentioned the meeting. No one asked if I'd flagged it. They just scheduled another PR campaign to distract the clients. It became a pattern. I'd raise an issue, be dismissed, watch the problem explode, then watch someone else sweep up the pieces, poorly, and claim the credit for fixing it. I realized I wasn't the safety net. I was the floor mat. They didn't lean on me because they trusted me. They leaned on me because they assumed I'd never push back, that I'd always clean up quietly, that I'd always come back, that I was safe to overlook. They were wrong. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. I was sitting in my usual booth at Layton's Cafe, 3 blocks from my apartment, where the barista knew my order and no one asked what I did for a living. I was reviewing the draft of the quarterly tax summary out of habit. Technically, I wasn't even part of the executive team anymore. But old habits don't die, especially when you've lived your entire adulthood inside spreadsheets. The coffee had gone cold when I clicked over to LinkedIn, just scrolling aimlessly. Job updates, new roles, people moving. I almost missed it, but then a photo stopped me. Samantha, standing beside a tall man in a gray suit, his handshake firm, her smile wide. Behind them, a massive screen printed with our company's logo, Harper & Sons Industrial, beneath the words, "Welcoming Donovan Doyle to the Harper family, a new era of strategic growth in the Midwest." Donovan Doyle. The name rang a bell. Too sharp, too precise. I clicked his profile. CEO of Valor Bridge Capital, a man infamous in financial circles for acquiring family-owned manufacturing firms, gutting them, flipping assets, and walking away with tidy profits while communities collapsed. I stared at the photo. My chest tightened. No email had been sent. No board memo. No shareholder notice. Nothing. I wasn't just excluded. I was eliminated. I called my mother. She picked up after 3 rings. "Elaine," she said. Her voice was light, casual, almost distracted. "Is everything all right?" "I just saw the Valor Bridge announcement," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "You brought in Doyle without notifying shareholders." She paused, just long enough to confirm everything I feared. "Oh," she said, yes, things moved quickly. You didn't think I deserved to be informed?" I asked. "This affects ownership structure, voting power, my equity." There was a beat of silence. Then she said it. "You're not there every day anymore, Elaine. We didn't think you'd fully grasp the scope of the partnership." There it was. The knife slid in so cleanly, I almost missed the sting. "I'm not qualified to understand." I asked, voice flat. "You stepped back," she replied smoothly. "You can't expect to have a say when you're not present." I took a breath, then gave a soft laugh. It wasn't bitter. It was dry, hollow, final. Samantha's voice joined the call. Of course. I could picture her exactly. Fresh blowout, red lipstick, one hand on a champagne flute. "Elaine," she purred, "no one's trying to push you out. This deal is about scalability, global vision. You're great at the little stuff. Ledger management, compliance, contracts. But Valor Bridge? That's next level. Don't blow this out of proportion." I didn't answer. I simply ended the call. Not out of anger. Out of preservation. If I said one more word, I would have cracked. Not in front of them. Never again. I stared at the phone in my hand, my reflection in the dark screen. That was the moment I realized something vital. They hadn't just underestimated me. They had forgotten who I was. And now, they were going to remember. I wasn't invited to the board meeting. There was no calendar alert, no forwarded agenda, no formal notice. But I knew it was happening. The signs were obvious: tight-lipped assistants, after-hours security passes, catering orders for the top floor. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I wouldn't dare show up. They were wrong. That morning, I wore a gray blazer, minimal makeup, hair pulled back, nothing flashy, nothing to distract, just precise, sharp presence. I walked past reception without checking in, badge still active, past the rows of employees who used to greet me with half smiles and mumbled thanks. I stepped into the executive elevator and pressed 15. The doors opened to silence and polished wood. At the end of the hallway, through the frosted glass door, I saw them. My mother at the head of the table, Samantha lounging in her signature red blazer, and a group of board members arranged like chess pieces around her. Every head turned when I walked in. No one said a word. I didn't ask to speak. I simply walked to the center of the table, opened my leather folio, and laid out a printed packet. 12 pages of analysis, market projections, and risk assessments related to Valor Bridge and Donovan Doyle. Then I looked at my mother. "This acquisition," I said calmly, "violates 3 sections of the company's shareholder agreement, including conflict of interest disclosures, and required unanimous consent for structural realignment." I turned to Samantha. "You moved forward without notifying the second largest shareholder." Silence. Someone at the far end shifted in their seat. Samantha leaned back, arms crossed, trying to look amused. "Elaine, this isn't the place for personal grievances." I didn't look away. "It's not personal. It's contractual." My mother stood up slowly. She walked around the side of the table, heels tapping like a ticking clock. She stopped directly across from me, her face unreadable, her voice low. "You should leave now." "No," I said. "I have the right to be here, as a shareholder and a founding family member." She stared at me, and in that moment I saw something break, something she had kept buried under layers of control, calculation, and curated smiles. Her hand moved fast. The sound cracked through the room like a whip. She slapped me, right across the face, not hard enough to bruise, just hard enough to humiliate. I didn't flinch. I didn't touch my cheek. I didn't even blink. I looked at her, and I saw her for what she truly was: not a leader, not a matriarch, just a woman desperately holding onto a narrative she could no longer control. No one said anything. No one stood up. No one stopped her. They just watched. The daughter she raised, the CFO she erased, the threat she thought she'd neutralized. I calmly collected the documents from the table, slid them back into my folio, and walked toward the door. Before I left, I turned slightly. "Thank you," I said, "for making your position clear." Then I stepped out into the hallway, closed the door behind me, and never walked back into that building again. The air outside the building felt different, sharper, not because of the slap. I hardly registered the sting, but because something inside me had shifted. A silence had settled where the need to explain myself used to live, and in its place a singular clarity. They didn't want me in the room, so I'd take the entire building out from under them. I drove home, each red light punctuated by a memory of late nights rewriting vendor agreements, of signing short-term loans under my own name to cover cash flow gaps, of my mother asking me, no, expecting me, to fix what others had broken without ever once calling it leadership. They thought I was a function, a tool, a calculator in heels. They forgot what I really was, a record keeper, and I kept everything. Back at my apartment, I pulled the worn leather binder from the back of my closet, the one no one knew existed. Inside, years of printouts, backup contracts, email threads, handwritten notes on vendor renegotiations, tax documents, personal wire transfers. I had saved them not out of suspicion, but out of habit, my version of security. That night, I didn't sleep. I scanned documents, created folders, labeled timelines. I wrote down every instance where my money had saved Harper and Sons, from payroll emergencies to factory equipment failures. At 2:43 a.m., I opened a fresh spreadsheet and started compiling a master log. Every loan I issued, every receipt I covered, every time I extended credit to preserve operations. By sunrise, the file was 37 tabs long. At 9 a.m., I called Michael Trent. "Do you still know anyone at North Shore Capital?" I asked. He paused. "Depends. You thinking of walking away?" "I already did," I said. "Now I want to sell." "Your mother and sister won't like it." "They don't have to," I replied. He was quiet a moment, then gave a low chuckle. "Elaine, they really chose the wrong person to cross." We met that afternoon in his downtown office, sun streaming in behind the blinds. I brought 3 USB drives, 2 folders, and my binder. Michael scanned a few documents, then leaned back. "This isn't just a sale file," he said. "It's a forensic history. This could win lawsuits." "I don't want a lawsuit," I said. "I want to sell my 40%, and I want to sell it to someone who'll make them answer for what they've done." He nodded. "North Shore won't care about family ties. They care about margins, compliance, and whether someone like Donovan Doyle is about to blow a hole through a balance sheet." "Good," said. "Then they'll love this." 3 days later, we had a meeting scheduled. North Shore sent a team of 3, an acquisitions lead, a legal advisor, and a risk analyst. I showed up with my binder, my drives, and a calm expression they didn't expect. I wasn't there to plead. I was there to offer leverage. I walked them through the company's silent dependencies on me, the undocumented loans, the off-book negotiations, the vendor bridges that only held because of my name. I showed them the danger signs in the Donovan Doyle deal, inflated forecasts, misaligned projections, and missing shareholder approvals. When I finished, the risk analyst looked at me across the table. "You kept all this?" she asked. "Yes." "Why?" "Because I knew one day I'd need to remember exactly how much I gave before I finally stopped." It was a Wednesday morning when the call came. I was in my apartment kitchen, stirring coffee absent-mindedly while reviewing a budget proposal from a small eco-manufacturing startup in Oregon, my first freelance client since leaving Harper and Sons. My phone rang once, twice. I recognized the number immediately. "Michael Trent." "They're in," he said. "North Shore has approved the buy. 40%. Full market valuation. Plus 10% premium for strategic value." I didn't answer right away. Not because I was surprised, but because I felt nothing. No gloating. No rush of vindication. Just stillness. Like a house finally quiet after a long storm. 3 days later, I sat in a private conference room on the 19th floor of a glass tower downtown. Across from me were 3 representatives from North Shore Capital, dressed in crisp charcoal suits, briefcases resting silently at their feet. They didn't ask why I was selling. They didn't ask about family. They only asked for 2 things: numbers and legal risk. I gave them both, backed by ledgers, time-stamped emails, notarized signatures. I explained the history of the firm, the true financial landscape beneath the glossy PR campaigns, the role I had played even without the title. By page 14, their legal advisor stopped flipping. "How long have you been keeping this documentation?" she asked. "Since I was 20, I said. "I started in the records room." "And how much of this was ever formally acknowledged?" I smiled faintly. "Not much. But recognition isn't why I kept it. I kept it because I believe data doesn't lie. People do." The signing happened the following Monday. The documents were printed on heavyweight ivory stock, each page initialed, every clause precise. No music, no cameras, no champagne, just a pen, a table, and a quiet kind of finality. I signed slowly, reading each page, though I knew them by heart. Seller, Elaine Harper. Buyer, North Shore Capital. Asset, 40% of Harper and Sons Industrial, including voting rights and audit privileges. The moment I finished, Michael slid the last page toward me. It's done. I didn't speak, but something inside me exhaled for the first time in years. Exactly 48 hours later, North Shore issued a formal shareholder disclosure to Harper and Sons. A new strategic stakeholder now held 40% of the company, and they would be initiating a comprehensive 2-week financial audit, effective immediately. I didn't wait for the fallout. I turned off my phone, made lunch, opened my laptop, and kept working. The first day passed in silence, but on the second morning, I woke to 12 missed calls from my mother, 6 from the corporate office, and 7 from Samantha, all in under an hour. I didn't pick up. I didn't reply. I sipped coffee by the window as rain tapped quietly against the glass, and for the first time in 16 years, no part of me felt obligated to respond. At 2:17 p.m., an unknown number appeared on my screen. Something told me to answer. I didn't speak first, but the voice that came through? Shaky, rushed, uncertain. Elaine, it's Mom. I waited. They're freezing everything, Elaine. North Shore sent auditors. They want 5 years of records. They're questioning the Kentucky expansion loan, the Donovan deal, even the vendor contracts. She sounded smaller than I'd ever heard her. I kept my tone even. Then cooperate. They're doing what responsible shareholders do. She hesitated. You still have the backup reports, don't you? You always saved everything. If you could just talk to them. I cut in gently. You told me I didn't understand strategic vision, that I was only good with numbers. I let the silence answer for me. Then I hung up. 2 hours after I ended the call, Samantha tried. Her number lit up my screen, but I didn't answer. Then it came again, and again. On the 4th call, I picked up, not because I wanted to talk, but because I wanted to hear her panic with my own ears. Elaine, she snapped before I could speak. You're destroying everything. These people, North Shore, they're not what you think. They're here to dismantle the company. They're tearing through every file like we're criminals. I said nothing. They're freezing accounts, halting expansion. They're threatening lawsuits. Investors are panicking. Mom's a wreck. I could almost picture her, nails tapping against a wine glass, voice high and brittle. You have to fix this, she said. I almost laughed. You always said I only handled minor tasks, I replied. Why dump the major ones on me now? She started to respond, but I ended the call. At 8:04 p.m. that night, Michael forwarded me North Shore's initial audit scan. It was 36 pages long, 14 flagged irregularities, an unreported short-term loan of $840,000 used to prop up a marketing expansion, a misvalued contract tied to Donovan Doyloff by nearly $300,000, payroll inconsistencies, deferred taxes, vendor kickbacks. They weren't just sloppy. They were arrogant enough to think no one would ever look too closely. I forwarded the file to both my mother and Samantha. No message, just one line in the subject. Refer to section 5.3, page 17. An hour later, Samantha texted, I get it. Have you been planning this for a while? I didn't respond, because it didn't matter. They didn't need to know how long I had been preparing. They only needed to understand that I had, and that my silence was never surrender. It was the calm before the detonation. By the end of week 2, it wasn't just a financial audit. It was a structural collapse. North Shore's expanded report came in at 47 pages, with entire departments marked for reorganization. The firm had uncovered over $2.3 million in financial irregularities across 4 years, most of it stemming from shady vendor contracts, inflated PR campaigns, and short-term loans recorded as miscellaneous operational liquidity. One section, hit harder than the rest. Page 38. Multiple instances of internal advances sourced from personal funds belonging to Elaine Harper. No documentation of board acknowledgement, repayment, or crediting. I read the line twice, and for a moment, I felt it. Not bitterness, not even satisfaction, just clarity. They had leaned on me like a crutch for years, and never even noticed they were limping. Now there was no one left to carry the weight. North Shore's final recommendation arrived that Friday. Suspend all asset expansion. Freeze all discretionary spending. Initiate legal counsel to investigate potential shareholder fraud. Michael called me on his way to the Portland airport. It's no longer just internal, he said. They're recommending legal authorities review the books. I didn't flinch. What about Doyle? I asked. He exhaled. Valor Bridge is furious. Turns out your mother promised them projected dividends and transfer rights she had no legal authority to give. If North Shore's findings hold, they could sue for breach of trust and fraud in negotiation. Of course, it had all been a house of cards, built on confidence and the belief that no one, especially me, would ever blow. Later that evening, I received an email from a former intern. She had worked under me during my last year. Just one line, you were the spine. Now they know. I read it once, then closed the laptop and let the silence take care of the rest. It started with a voicemail. My mother's voice, barely above a whisper. Elaine, I know you're angry, but I never thought it would get this far. She paused. They're freezing everything. Contracts are being pulled. We can't access accounts. Vendors are panicking. And the board. Elaine, they're talking about legal action. We need you. Her voice cracked. You always kept things under control. I didn't realize how much you did. I listened. I didn't delete the message, but I didn't reply, because it wasn't the words that mattered anymore. It was the timing. They needed me now, not because they missed me, but because they couldn't survive without me. 2 days later, Samantha made her move. Not through a call, not through a message, through LinkedIn. A long, carefully crafted post appeared on her profile. Polished, elegant, dripping with curated humility. Transitions are difficult. Sometimes people we trusted walk away when we need them most, but we remain committed to Harper and Son's future. The comments were instant, some supportive, most weren't. One read, I worked under Elaine Harper for 5 years. Without her, the South plant would have closed in 2020. Let's not rewrite history. Another, if anyone walked away, it's because you pushed them out first. I didn't need to say anything. The truth was speaking, and for once, the world was listening. Then came the fallout. Rumors surfaced that Valor Bridge, Donovan Doyle's firm, had hired legal counsel. They were demanding renegotiation of the partnership agreement or, failing that, were preparing to file suit. North Shore pushed deeper, requesting financial logs going back a full decade. Auditors uncovered discrepancies in the Western branch. Contracts signed under Samantha's authority without shareholder approval, misreported revenues, falsified vendor declarations. It wasn't just messy anymore. It was criminal. That week, I received a private email from a senior executive at a global manufacturing firm, a company I had once tried to partner with, only to be blocked by Samantha and my mother because it wasn't the right fit. Now, they wanted me. Subject line, we've been following your work. We'd love to talk. At the bottom of the message, a handwritten note scanned in. You're the kind of leader who walks away quietly and leaves a storm behind her. Let's talk when you're ready. I didn't respond right away, not because I wasn't interested, but because for the first time in my career, I didn't need to say yes just to feel seen. That night, I walked down by the Ohio River, just me, the wind, and the city lights reflected on dark water. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who stayed up fixing contracts, no one would thank her for. The one who was told she was great with numbers, but not leadership. The one who thought silence was safety. She was gone, and in her place stood someone who understood what silence really was. A weapon, a mirror, and when used right, a legacy. I didn't return to the Harper estate, not to gloat, not even to collect my things, because the truth is, I had already left long before I ever signed those papers. I just didn't realize it until now. I used to believe that if I worked hard enough, stayed long enough, sacrificed deep enough, I'd earn my place. That one day someone would look across a boardroom table and say, "You belong here." But belonging doesn't come from endurance. It comes from respect. And they never gave it to me, not because I didn't earn it, but because they were never willing to admit that I had. I moved to a modest apartment in Portland, 2 bedrooms, hardwood floors, and a view of the hills. Nothing extravagant, just mine. I started taking on select clients, female-led startups, small businesses navigating rapid growth. People who reminded me of who I used to be. The ones doing too much for too little, hoping someone would notice. And I helped them not just survive, but scale, because I knew the blind spots. I'd lived inside them for 16 years. Each morning, I brewed my coffee in silence. No voicemails from my mother. No late-night texts about a payment issue. No expectations to fix something I never broke. Just me and the life I built with no strings, no apologies, and no permissions required. I haven't blocked my mother or Samantha. They send the occasional holiday message. I respond politely. We don't fight. We just don't speak of the past, because nothing would ever be enough for them to admit they were wrong, and I no longer need them to. Family isn't always a bloodline. Sometimes it's a best friend who texts, "I'm proud of you," when your name appears in an article. Sometimes it's a lawyer who says, "Take your time," when the world wants urgency. And sometimes it's just you, learning to protect the parts of yourself that no one ever taught you how to defend. There are nights I still lie awake thinking about it all. Not the money, not the company, not even the slap. But the years I spent believing that if I just gave a little more, stayed a little longer, proved myself a little harder, that maybe, just maybe, they'd love me back the way I loved them. That belief is gone now. But I found something better. Freedom. Not the loud, performative kind. The quiet, permanent kind. The kind that doesn't ask to be seen, because it sees itself. One evening, Emma, my college roommate, now a mother of 2, called me after reading an article that mentioned my name in connection to North Shore's restructuring project. She asked, "If you could go back, would you leave earlier?" I thought about it, then shook my head. "No," I said, because if I'd left earlier, a part of me would have always wondered, maybe just one more effort would have changed everything. But now I know. I wasn't wrong. I just needed a different road. And I've taken that road, with nothing behind me, but the silence of a door I closed with my own hands, and everything ahead, finally mine.